This week's podcast is episode 2 in the series of Coping with Purpose. In this episode, we will be demystifying the anxiety response. Anxiety and its related symptoms are the most common mental health complaint, yet is probably the most misunderstood. People, my husband included, who have no anxiety at all. I swear, he's like a babbling brook during a storm. He's peaceful, constant, steady flowing. Me, on the other hand, well, I could be the storm, I could cause the storm, or I could worsen the storm. He used to have anxiety before we were married, but somehow after marrying me, his anxiety went away and mine surfaced. Makes you wonder if that can be transferred through bodily contact. Anyway, squirrel, back on topic. People often tell those who are feeling anxious or, God forbid, having a panic attack to just relax or stop worrying or everything will be okay. For the majority of us, those words, just relax, it'll be okay, or stop worrying, is kind of like telling us to build a house, but don't give us the tools or the directions. I don't know about you. You may be a master builder, but I can't do it. There's no way I could build it. I don't have the time to follow the directions, but I know without tools, I definitely could not. So you've got to start by understanding that anxiety is really a complex interaction between our brain, our body, and our life experiences. So today's podcast is going to explain what anxiety is, why it shows up when it does, and how those maladaptive coping mechanisms actually develop over time, or what we call normalize. So, what is anxiety? It's not simply worry. It's actually a physiological response designed to protect you from harm. The amygdala, the amygdala. We're going to learn more than we needed to know about the amygdala during these podcasts. But the amygdala is the body's alarm system. The alarm detects danger, threat, and activates our stress hormones of adrenaline and cortisol and produces that protective response that you've heard of called the fight or flight response. Now, the amygdala stimulating the alarm system and the response we discussed is actually normal and is protective. The problem occurs when the alarm system becomes overly sensitive or overly activated. How do I determine normal protective responses versus problematic responses? Well, those symptoms of racing thoughts, muscle tension, elevated heart rate, shortness of breath, stomach issues, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, stomach pains, cramping, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, and you may also see some sweating. That is not related to hot flashes or menopause, ladies, and I feel your pain there. Though uncomfortable and distressing, these symptoms are not life-threatening. Despite how it feels when you're in that moment, they are not life-threatening. They're actually signs that your nervous system is protecting and being protective of you. We're back. So when does it become a problem? It becomes a problem when your life is affected, your relationships, your work, your sleep, and your ability just to enjoy life. And you're going to hear me talk about that in many podcasts. Is when does it become a problem? When you can't handle it on your own, and it actually starts to affect how you live and how you function. So how do you know if it's a problem? Well, one way is you start worrying chronically. You worry about multiple things, uncontrollable things, things that really don't matter, or what you think matter, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not that important in your life. When you start to avoid places, things, situations, people to prevent having those feelings, and when you feel the need for constant reassurance that everything is going to be okay, even though we discussed earlier that those words are useless and pointless at really attempts to counter the anxiety symptoms, we feel that constant reassurance is what we rely on. And the last one is probably not the last one, but the last one for this podcast is it's a problem if you're over planning, overthinking, overchecking, overdoing. So anything you can do to try to lessen that distress. So why does maladaptive coping make sense, at least initially? In the last podcast, we talked about positive and adaptive versus negative and maladaptive coping. Of course, adaptive coping is always preferable, but it isn't easy. Maladaptive coping is, because it's protective and automatic, then it is our immediate go-to. Unfortunately, as we've discussed before, the maladaptive can eventually become problematic. We also discussed examples of maladaptive coping in the last episode. And these behaviors, once again, just to remind you, bring short-term relief, which teaches the brain to rely on them and making that be a normal response, ultimately increasing your anxiety over long term. I'm going to start adding a segment in each podcast about what God says about anxiety or what God says about depression. I wanted to share with you about what I think God says about anxiety. Truthfully, He doesn't want us to sit in it. He wants us to take action. And here's how He wants us to take action. He wants us to recognize His sovereignty. In 1 Peter 5:6-9, He says, "Humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time He will lift you up in honor. Give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you. So stay alert. Watch out for the great enemy, the devil. He prowls like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your Christian brothers and sisters all over the world are going through the same kind of suffering as you." He wants us to pray, and He wants us to ask for help. And in Philippians 4:6-7, which is, everybody probably knows this verse, but do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer, petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. He wants us to trust in His will. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight." He wants us to seek His direction. In Matthew 11:28-29, He says, "Come to me, all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." In Psalm 34:4, David said, "I sought the Lord, and He answered me and delivered me from my fears." He also wants us to acknowledge His presence. In Joshua 1:9, "Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And in Hebrews 13:6, God said, "I will never fail you, I will never abandon you." So we can say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear. What can mere people do to me?" And lastly, He wants us to accept His promise. In Psalm 118:6 reads, "The Lord is on my side, and I will not fear. What can man do to me?" in Psalm 94:19, when the cares of my heart are many, your consolations cheer my soul. I could go on, and I have several more verses, but these are just an instance, just a little small aspect of what God says about anxiety. He wants you to, 1, recognize His sovereignty, pray, ask for help, trust in His will, seek His direction, acknowledge His presence, and then accept His promise. So now we're going to learn that shifting the paradigm is how we control our anxiety. Eliminating it or controlling it does not automatically constitute emotional or mental healing. It starts with changing your relationship with it. So, can I cure you? Can anyone cure you of anxiety? Maybe if it's situational, maybe you can, but truthfully, it's more about changing your relationship with it. In other words, taking the power away from the condition or the emotional aspect and putting yourself in charge. So how do we change that? It seems pretty simple, but for someone with anxiety, it is anything but simple. So changing it requires that you notice and recognize the anxiety's present. And instead of giving into it, stop trying to rationalize why you have it. It really doesn't matter why you have it. It just matters how we can control how it affects you. Understand the association of the symptoms related to the anxiety condition. Allow the symptoms to kind of abate before you try to make decisions based on how you feel. In that moment, when we are very anxious and upset, making decisions is not the right time because they're usually irrational and based on emotional response. So allow the symptoms to abate. Then you want to, depending on what the situation is and what's causing your anxiety or what's the major source of your anxiety, you want to slowly incorporate gradual exposure instead of avoidance. So if family causes you a lot of anxiety and being around your family, instead of avoiding them and breaking that relationship, maybe gradual exposure to, okay, let's try to just go to dinner somewhere and spend just an hour with each other and see if we can move past things, and then slowly increase your exposure to them where you're spending maybe holidays with them again. So you want to incorporate that gradual exposure instead of just avoiding. You want to control the physical symptoms by regulating the nervous system. Most of you have heard of or actually practice deep breathing exercises, but those are very beneficial because they kind of centralize you and bring you back to a safe space, and they control the symptoms. So those are just a few ways that you can actually help make some small changes. And the small changes will eventually turn into big changes. So what are our takeaways? 1, worry is normal. Anxiety is normal. Let me say it again. Worrying is normal. Being anxious is normal. Number 2, avoidance of the stress or the anxiety, avoidance of whatever causes your anxiety, produces temporary relief, but long-term avoidance can promote maladaptive coping. 3, promote change by incorporating the recognition of the symptoms. So first you've got to recognize what's going on so that you can make those small changes. And the last one is control the symptoms to decrease the effects of the response, the deep breathing. So we're going to practice a little what I call the 4-4-4 method. And you can do this anytime, anywhere, especially if somebody, let's say you're in a situation where somebody has said something that made your anxiety go through the roof. If you take 4, 4, and 4, then you'll be more ready to respond in a positive way. And what that 4-4-4 is, you're going to take a slow, deep breath in through your nose for 4 seconds, hold it for 4, and exhale through your mouth for 4. Try it one more time. Another option for controlling symptoms is called grounding. Seems kind of quirky, but it actually works. When you are having an anxiety moment, we try to bring you back to reality, I guess, so to speak, by saying, name 3 things you see. Then you name 3 things you hear. And then you move 3 parts of your body. It can be your fingers, your hands, but what you're doing is making a conscious effort to focus on something else so it brings you back to a calmer state. So that's all the time we have today, but I thank you for spending time with me, and I hope you had some good takeaways from this. While those are some of the options for helping with anxiety symptoms, of course, that's not exhaustive by any means, but those are ones that you can do right where you're at to help you just relax for the moment. Remember, you're not broken, you're adapting. The next episode in this series will be focused on debunking depression. Always consider that mental health is about mental ease. And that is all about me. So until next time, breathe.